Well, hello. Today we have Army Reserve Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Jaster. She is a soldier, an engineer, a wife, a mother, and a trailblazer. Welcome to this call.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I'm just going to read a little bit about your bio so I can center more on your background. And so you're one of the only three women to graduate from the first integrated United States Army Ranger program, which is one of the most difficult combat training courses in the world. You were the first female Army Reserve officer to become a Ranger qualified. And then you completed the training, which 36% of male and female students fail within the first 4 days after refusing to succumb to exhaustion and repeatedly recycling through or retrying several phases of the multi-locational course. You endured the training, which takes a minimum of 61 days. This is crazy. And includes up to 20 hours of training per day alongside a strict diet for a grueling 6 months. You graduated at age 37, while the average trainee age is 23. Wow. Okay, this is just like a little bit about your background. I mean,
Yeah.
what was going through your mind when you were going through this training? Like what
It
kept you
started,
going?
yeah, yeah. Well, it started off as this crazy opportunity. No woman had ever done it before. My dad had gone to Ranger school. Many of my peers that I serve with in the military, everybody who is really high up in the military, or at least in the Army, seems to have gone to Ranger school or another one of these combat leadership courses. And um, it just had never been open to women. So when I started, it was this concept of, hey, can I be the first woman? Can I break that glass ceiling? Can I pound through the barriers? But after a while, it I don't want to say my thought process degraded, but it definitely changed because what I saw is being a first, it could be this glorious or even conflict intertwined ordeal,
Mhm.
or it could be a very personal experience. And what started happening over time is instead of being a believers and disbelievers, it started becoming more about the individuals. And so I'm talking about the people I was serving with. And after a while, it wasn't, hey, can I change the face of the military? Can I change the way the Senate Armed Services Committee talks about women in uniform? It
Mhm.
became, hey, there's a 22-year-old guy standing next to me who someday could be a sergeant major, could be a battalion commander. And those are roles that are extremely senior in our military. Those are roles where people, they have, 1,000 people in their command. And
Mhm.
if I can change this young 22-year-old's mind about women in the military, that's more important than the Senate or some magazine cover, because that person's going to influence the thought processes, the programs, the standards of 1,000 people someday. And think of all the people that those 1,000 people will touch. And now we're driving true change. So, what started in my mind as this grandiose, hey, I'm going to do something really cool and be a first, turned into, I have the opportunity to change an influential mind and see the trickle effect so that when my daughter and son are in the military, these aren't even issues anymore. Just like no one thinks about the days when blacks and whites were segregated in the military. We read books about it, but nobody thinks about that anymore. Someday, that's how we're going to look at gender in the military, and I wanted to be part of that.
That's so powerful, and I like your approach as something like you were mentioning, not to get the attention, but to change the perspective in the system because people are systems, right? The system is people. And so if people
Right.
and I'm just curious, like why I mean, when you applied, did it even have because you mentioned like it wasn't really for women. And so how did that happen? I mean, did you apply and they're like, "Oh yeah, maybe I guess you can do it." I mean, you still had to qualify, right? So, yeah, tell me a little bit more about how that how you even got into the program in the
Yeah.
first place.
So in 2014, the Army said, "Hey, we think the world is ready to let women into combat arms. But before we go there, we have to see how women would perform at the foremost combat arms leadership school." So in October of 2014, the Army said, "Hey, if you're a female in uniform between these ranks, um, and you think you'd want to try to go to Ranger School, just send in your social security number, like through your chain of command into the Department of the Army." And there was a whole heck of a lot more interest than the Army thought there would have ever been. And so then they had to make a competitive program, where you had to get nominated by your major command. They're called MACOMs in the military. And each major command had so many slots for women. And these were slots to go to a pre ranger course to make sure that you were well enough adapted to the requirements and the training so that you could pass the actual ranger school. So they reserved slots for, I think, 60 women, and 60 women per, I think it was 4 different courses. And however many women graduated, they were going to allow up to a certain number into the first integrated Ranger School class. And that first integrated Ranger School class ended up having 19 of us start the course, and ultimately 3 of us graduated.
Wow. And how did you, and did they change the, I'm assuming it was the same, if it was integrated, um, it was the same as the men, right? Like as what the men were doing, right? It wasn't
It was the same thing. We lived in the same barracks. We ate the same foods. We didn't shower at the same time. They did give us our own shower time. Um,
good.
but we lived in the field. We did everything the guys did. We had to do the same amount of pull-ups, the same pace for the run, carry the same amount of gear. It was the only difference was we had to keep a 1/4 inch of hair, and the guys shaved their heads. So we were almost bald, and the guys were completely bald. That was the only way you could tell the men from the women.
That is wild. I can only imagine. I'm like picturing it in my head. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about all the other things that you've done too, because you graduated from, West Point, and you worked in the Shell oil, well, in Shell in oil, in Houston. I lived in Houston for a year.
Okay.
I feel like Houston is either you like it or not. It's a love and hate relationship. I'm from San Antonio. But Houston was really humid for me. Anyway, sorry, just a side note.
No, funny
But
because I live in San Antonio now.
I didn't know
Yeah,
that. Oh,
yeah,
I'm moving back, so we'll have to meet in person.
definitely. Coffee
Uh,
or wine, depending on where you are.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. But yeah, just tell me a little bit more about your background in the military. I mean, this is really the reason why we, onboarded you as a speaker. Not just for your impressive background and the fact that you were the first, and that you've, just even your perspective on how to do that in a way that is, um, actionable, and and that other people can do as well, right? And or try to start thinking about ways where they can be the first and they can change and kind of lead that space with activism. So yeah, tell me a little bit more about your background and work and your book before we dive
For sure.
into some of the sessions that you offer.
Yeah. So a little bit more about my background is I am a West Point grad, graduated in 2000 and am an engineer. As everyone is very familiar, 2001 brought us September 11th. So I spent much of my mid 20s in Afghanistan and Iraq, and later went on to South Korea. I do have a master's in civil engineering. I have a focus in concrete, so I am a super nerd, but I also make sure that I keep my body as fresh as I do my mind. So I believe in continuing my academic studies. I'm starting my second master's this summer, but I also I've competed in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, I've competed in CrossFit as an adult. This past September, I just finished a 700-mile bike ride for Team 1 Mile, where we rode 700 miles to raise awareness and money for Gold Star children. Gold Star
Mm.
children are those who have lost a parent to military service. And we were able to raise over $100,000 for those kids to send them to a summer camp, which is pretty great. So I do try to continually find reasons to lead myself as well as lead others. Probably the hardest job I have is I'm a mother and a wife, balancing
Mhm.
those with being the type of person who has personal goals as well as goals for her family and goals for her children, and then wanting to be a supportive wife. Um, that's always a juggle. So I think, not yet moving on to our next discussion point, but kind of foreshadowing, I think one of the benefits I bring to a lot of working people is how do you balance that work and your personal life? And it doesn't have to be just children or other family situations. It's um, everybody has a life outside of work, but you spend 40 plus hours a week at work, plus commute time, etc. Plus you got to sleep sometime. How do you really live a full life where on your deathbed you're not going to say, God, I wish I would have worked less and done X more. And that's kind of part of the community growth that I want to bring when I give some of my talks or work with clients.
That's very powerful and definitely something I'm gonna have to start. So I'm having my baby in a few weeks, and so definitely nervous but excited to to see what that looks like in reality. Because I really feel like women. I mean, I've just even going through pregnancy has been its own journey that I wasn't expecting it to be that hard. And I think we put on a lot on our shoulders, and we kind of put our head down and do the work. And where in reality, sometimes, yeah, we're pretty powerful beings. And yeah, I had so much empathy in my pregnancy for women, and I can't wait to see like what the real work life balance, which doesn't exist, looks like. But
Well,
Lisa, tell me
yes.
a bit more about. I want to dive into your programs and courses. So you have one. I know you do some for ERGs, and you have like
Mhm.
different training courses for employee resource groups. And so let's talk about, and I think what I really like about your courses is you have a course and then there's modules within, right? And different
Correct.
courses. And so, like, for example, let's just put an example. So an ERG wants to bring you in, and the focus is business for teams and leadership. And so some of the courses, and I'm going to mention them, and then you can dive in and share a little bit
Yeah.
more, is, for example, for high potential managers, right? So one course is critical thinking and problem solving for high potential, for high potentials. Tell me a little bit more about that one.
I think high potentials is an area we think we're developing people, but we're not.
Mm,
So what ends up happening in a lot of companies, we take our best horses and we constantly race them, but we never train them. And so being an individual contributor and being a leader are two totally different skill sets. You need to be one before you can be the other, but a good individual contributor does not necessarily develop into a good leader. So very early in someone's career, we need to identify who our high potentials are, and we need to give them the skill sets and then test them on the skill sets that our companies need so that we know who we should develop. And
mm,
I say that to say I had an employee that I worked with for quite some time, absolutely fantastic, a leader in the field. He was what we call a peer leader. Everybody would follow him. If the boss said something, well, if this guy said it, then everyone was going to do it immediately. But he never wanted to be in management. Part of the reason he never wanted to be in management is because he didn't understand how he could translate his skills without losing who he already was. He thought he'd have to be like that manager that already existed. So things like
mm,
critical thinking for high potentials is to help that individual contributor who has demonstrated some leadership capability understand what that leap is to from I understand what I need to do. I understand how I need to do it. I can get my peers to do it to, okay, how can I jump up a level, not
Mhm.
do work of my my team, let my team do their work, and then but continue to add at a bigger and more influential level. So that's a brief overview, but all of the classes in high potentials is taking communication, and you can take it for senior leaders. All the communication fundamentals are the same. You can Google those,
Yep.
but what are the tools and techniques you can use to apply those techniques to actual communication? Like when a leadership communication is helping somebody understand the why without sitting there and having to go around the room and explain it 30 different times. Um, but
Yeah.
a individual contributor communication is how do you let people know what you're doing without always submitting a task list at the end of the day? I mean,
Mm.
there's there's a lot that goes into that, but again, there's a huge spectrum, and the courses are really focused on the niche group. Are we high potentials? Are we individual contributors? Are we leaders or are we senior leaders?
Yeah, and I like how you have, like I said, the continuation, right? So you have a course, but you have different modules within it. Because you not only have that, then there's okay, how do you have strategic leadership and vision, influential communication and executive presence. So, covering a little bit about what you mentioned, um, all the way to emotional intelligence and leadership impact. So, yeah, this is like a very complete, if you want to talk a little bit about the other modules.
I think I think what I want to highlight is when I started working with ERGs, a lot of companies were bringing me in for an hour, 45 minutes. Hey, talk to my team. We need this to come out of this discussion. And then we'll wrap up with a 15-minute Q&A. Now, although that's fun, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with regards to Ranger School. It's not necessarily the most impactful thing you can
No,
do.
definitely not. Hmm.
So the modular system is set up so that we start talking, maybe it's communication, maybe it's impact, maybe it's
Hmm.
self-marketing, um, but they need to be discussed at intervals so that we're coming back to this, even reminding people that you're identified as a high potential. A lot of
Hmm.
times it'll change somebody's behavior. And you do see it after some of these really cool speeches. You go to the Veterans Day ceremony, you listen to a great speech. You go to the Women's Month ceremony, you hear a really great speech. You're motivated for 3, 4 days. Maybe you put a little sticky with a quote on it on your computer and you get it all excited, but it fades. It fades over time. So the modular setup allows me to give classes every 2 weeks or once a month and remind people, here's a nudge. Remember, you're identified as a high potential. So these are some of your skill sets you need to work on. Here are some
Hmm.
of the resources. And every module, um, if if the instructor is worth their weight in salt, they should have some sort of read ahead, some sort of articles, some sort of stay behind, some sort of tools and techniques. It needs to be something that can be brought into each individual's life and career. And a lot of these techniques are as applicable at home as they are in the office. So I think one of the things I want to push here is let's talk about the self marketing. And I forget exactly the title I used because I'm not looking at the modulars right now. But you're talking about self marketing. How do you present yourself as a leader? How do you present yourself as a leader among your peers? That is
Hmm.
very, very applicable to home life, to being married, to talking to your children. What face are you using, and are you doing it in such a way that people can understand where you're coming from just through the way you're presenting your information, your concerns, um, even the vacation you want to go on. Are you doing it in a way that can be heard?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of requests from companies on wanting more of a program or experience or training. And also seeing and working with ERGs on being able to provide like 3-part series, or like we were talking about now, the modules, and have something that people can come back to and create that community as well as you're taking these with your colleagues. And so, Lisa, and I'll be sharing more. Obviously, if you're curious about learning more, reach out to me and I can send, the list of the different modules and, that Lisa offers, and also topics that you can customize as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed having you here, Lisa, and learning a little bit more about your background, or well, not learning because I already know it, but like sharing it with people. Anything you'd like to share that you haven't said?
I would say, even if you're not going away from this discussion and thinking, okay, this is somebody I need to book, this is somebody I want to talk to, the little sticky note I'd want you to take away from this is be impactful in your community.
Mm,
I don't want to leave anyone without a takeaway, and being impactful in your community not only makes you feel better, but it makes us a better place to live, a better world, a better state, a better city, a better village. Wherever you are, try to improve what's immediately around you. That's my takeaway.
that's a beautiful takeaway. It's so instrumental to our sense of belonging too. People don't realize how much it contributes to even how you feel of your place in the world and in your workplace. So, Lisa, thank you again for making space and time today with me, and I enjoyed having you.
Thank you, Ingrid.